North Jersey in the mountains. Our family home was part of a mining railroad system. The old railroad was in our backwoods. Our home was an old slaughterhouse, livestock farm. Dug up skulls and bones my whole childhood. We actually had the ruins of the old slaughter mill in a field with a blood drainage system to a pit with lots of bones. My entire childhood shit would fly off my shelves onto the floor, or you'd set an object down on the counter and it would be gone. I actually witnessed these things. Sometimes I would feel someone sit on my bed too. As a young adult, I constantly burned sage in my room to try and get rid of whatever was stuck in my room. My parents remodeled the house and found a bunch of animal bones buried in the foundation, and by foundation, I mean a pile of dirt with wood set on top of it. Eventually, I felt the scary thing leave my room, but there was another ghost still present. During COVID, I moved back and with my parents, and a few times a week I would hear their heavy-ass door open and shut. They had a porch and deck W multiple doors, so air pressure literally could not cause a door slam. I'd hear heavy boot steps downstairs and yell, "Hey Dad." No response. Check parents' window that overlooked the driveway, and of course no one would be home. Parents are still in this house and say that they constantly find all the kitchen cabinet doors open. Or they hear shit in my old room that sounds like a bookcase falling over, and they'll rush up and everything will be perfectly fine. Or things will go missing and they'll find them in my old room. When they remodeled where the attic door staircase was became my mini bathroom. My dad never believed in ghosts, but now that he's retired, he 10,000% believes we got ghosts. He was in the military, so he thinks it's funny and calls the ghost Gladys, but Def prefers to spend his time outside. My mom does not think it's funny at all, and I'm just glad I live very far away and I refuse to stay with them when I visit. About 20 years ago, I and my 2 children rented an apartment. The app was the top floor of a home built in 1910. After a couple of nights, we settled in for some sleep. I thought I was dreaming about my children playing, but woke up due to their noise. Both were asleep. I tried going back to sleep, but the sounds resumed. Footsteps running across my ceiling, giggling, and laughter. The next day, I went to the attic to check things out. Nothing. That night, the sounds resumed. A few days later, I met my downstairs neighbors, so I asked them about it. The whole building was haunted by multiple entities. Their lights would shut off, the sinks would start running, and they'd seen shadow figures. So, we just accepted it. My deceased uncle, who'd followed me everywhere, would show up sometimes, easily discernible, as he's the only one that's ever been able to touch me. During that time, my uncle and grandma would show up in photos. We had no problems with any of them. Then we moved into a home I'd bought. While packing, one of them, unrelated to me, managed to pack itself into a box. Yeah, the one that likes to open all the cabinets and drawers in the night. The one that takes things and hides them. We saw it as a child, so we named it Newt. Now, if something goes missing, we kindly ask Newt to return it and wait a few minutes. It'll pop up somewhere obvious. The cats adore Newt as well. And yes, my grandma and uncle are here, but the kids stayed behind. I had very creepy experiences with some entities. It followed me throughout my childhood and into my 30s. I gave birth to my first baby just 3 months after I turned 17, and I had very severe PPD, but I didn't know it at the time. She was so overwhelmed with my newborn, angry all the time, and was just struggling a lot. I had an electronic cell phone hanging over her crib, which was in my room. The cell phone had 5 or 6 different melodies that it played, but only 2 buttons. A power button and a button to scroll through songs. If you left it alone, it would play the songs automatically. I would put him to bed at night and turn on his cell phone, but he wouldn't select any particular song, and some nights the spirit would change to find a particular song, always the same. Moonlight Sonata, a cheesy, jangly children's version of it. No matter what song was in the rotation, you would click the exact number of times to get to that song. I loved it when this happened. Very cool. And my baby was always calm. There were 2 other times when my baby would cry for her pacifier to go to sleep, and she couldn't find one anywhere in the house, anywhere. Both times I got irritated and told it that it wasn't funny to give me a pacifier so the baby would stop crying, and it did it a few minutes later. One of those times I walked down the hallway to the kitchen, turned around and walked back into the hallway, and 3 or 4 of her pacifiers were piled up in the middle of the hallway floor. The other time the pile appeared on my bed. I said thank you both times, and that was it, ha ha ha. The last time this happened was with my wallet, when I was in my early 30s. I haven't experienced any signs of this entity in many years, but I would love to. It's great to have a spirit, or whatever you want to call it, that just coexists with you. I knew this family that grew up on the shores of Lake Monroe in Indiana. They lived on site at a boat dock and managed the slips there. There were 3 sons living and working there with their mom. The boys and I were drinking around the campfire one night, and the eldest was telling me about how there was an abandoned town beneath the lake. Its citizens relocated and the valley flooded to form the reservoir for the wealthy to enjoy. I then asked for their spooky stories growing up on the lake. All 3 brothers immediately launched into an extremely detailed account of the haunting in the back room of their home. The room in question was a later addition to their log cabin. This bedroom was built later, probably in the 70s, kinda tacked onto the back with minimal insulation and cheap windows, raised on stilts to be level with the rest of the house. First, they said, this room was always colder than the rest of the house. I laughed and said that was normal for a cheap addition. They got serious and insisted that it could get cold enough in that room to see your breath even on warm summer nights. They had always found the room creepy, but it was their guests who had the really hellish nights there. Every time a guest stayed in the room, they always mentioned feeling a hostile or threatening presence, and some had even been woken by slaps, whispering, or hissing. Come morning, they often found guests had moved to the couch in the den. That felt a little anticlimactic, so I goaded them a little. Surely they had a better story for me. That's when they told me about the ghost girl. Some nights, the 2 oldest brothers would go catfishing in the dark. That's how they first saw it, a pale, white light bobbing in the darkness along the shoreline. It flickered like fire but wasn't the right color, they said. It didn't stand out at the time because they figured it was just another person noodling like they were. It wasn't until the morning that they realized that the person they'd seen had been halfway up the side of a sheer cliff, bobbing along at a walking pace. After that, they'd seen it many nights but didn't talk much about it. But one time while night fishing around 3 a.m., they finally decided to check it out a little closer. This time the light was bobbing along a low shoreline, so they approached in their fishing boat and called out to her from behind. They could see it was a girl or woman in a white nightgown, and that she was barefoot. She didn't stop or even slow down. Intrigued and probably horny, definitely dumb, they circled to get in front of her and greeted her again, asking if she needed help. They swore to me, in that aggressive way that young men do when they're actually scared, that it was a little girl in a white nightgown with no face. I was told this story in 2013 on the shores of Lake Monroe, by a bunch of boys who had previously been trying to act macho and flirt with me. But when this topic came up, their demeanor palpably changed. I know the details aren't terrifying, but it was the delivery that got me. Either they had rehearsed for this their whole lives, or this was something that they had really experienced, just a couple hundred feet from where we were sitting.